We all come across those games. You know, the ones you know nothing about, but you see a cool trailer and immediately, no matter how cold it is, your loins just heat up. Home Sweet Home was that for me. It is a first-person horror game set in Taiwan and takes full advantage of Taiwanese mysticism to create an interesting and unique experience. I have always favoured horror from countries outside of the West, primarily because they always have an interesting take on such things as ghosts, monsters, or curses. Also, they tend to focus on different aspects of horror. They aren't all blood and gore like the West tends to prioritise. They seem to be more of a slow burn that channels the psyche of the characters within their worlds and the audience. This is the kind of horror I enjoy. Home Sweet Home takes the conventions of the horror genre, first-person perspective, stealth, etc., but adds a touch of Taiwanese mysticism. And by a touch, I actually mean it's swimming in it. I couldn't wait to explore a horror game using a setting and belief system that I was not familiar with. I wondered what cool and terrifying things I would encounter in this world, and when I got my hands on the game, I slammed that thing into my PS4. Several hours later, the credits rolled, and though I enjoyed my time with Home Sweet Home, I was left feeling somewhat disappointed. And we are going to get into why, because this is a review of said game, and well, that is the whole point. The main plot of Home Sweet Home is pretty simple and somewhat cliche if you have ever consumed any horror media in your entire life. If you haven't, I don't know why you're here, but also welcome. Hi. But it does enough to distinguish itself, and the Taiwanese mysticism twist makes it feel fresh and interesting. The player controls Tim, whose wife has gone and made herself disappear. How rude of her. He's been extremely depressed and has isolated himself from his friends and family. I think we can all relate to that. I just want someone to talk to. One night he wakes up in a school. How he got there is lost on Tim, as he doesn't frequent schools too often, and when he does, he keeps it away from his girlfriend and law enforcement. He runs into this creepy girl covered in blood who seems to be best friends of a box cutter.
What the fuck?
Interesting choice of a social circle, but I'm not one to judge. Of course, she isn't friendly and tries to kill him. But also, Tim runs into his missing girlfriend. He seems to be running away from something or someone. He will run into her throughout the game, and each time, she will just look at him blankly, sometimes tell him to go away, but she will always kickstart her foot Ferraris and put the pedal to the metal. If my girlfriend treated me like this when I saw her in a nightmare world, I would just download Tinder and look for a girl who doesn't frequent haunted schools. Actually, that sounds pretty fun. The majority of the plot will feature Tim going to a spooky place, seeing his girlfriend and trying to catch up with her. Honestly though, there isn't too much to say about the core plot. It isn't really fleshed out, and when you think the narrative is going to start developing and any questions you have are going to be answered, the game just abruptly ends and states that more is coming in Home Sweet Home Part 2. For the first half of the game, I thought the plot was being set up really well and I was excited to see what was going to happen, but the second half just drops everything, which made me feel like the developers didn't want to complete the story because they had a sequel planned. Sure, that is the point of a sequel. I at least expected the game to be a somewhat complete package when it came to the story. All the setup with Jane's diary, which the player finds throughout each area, discussing potentially creepy things going on, the mystery surrounding why she disappeared and where did she go, the themes of Thai mysticism and how they are connected to the goings on in the game, and why Tim is being transported to these worlds. All of these ideas are interesting, and I was excited to see where they went, but they never go anywhere. Not only do they never go anywhere, they are barely developed beyond the initial idea. All you are left with is a message stating you will learn more in the next game, and a feeling of complete disappointment. If you came to Home Sweet Home looking for an engaging narrative that will interest you, you will be disappointed. So how was the rest of the game? Well, Home Sweet Home is broken up into two types of gameplay. The first the player will encounter is stealth. Stealth in this game plays like many horror games released over the past 10 years. You will sneak around, avoid enemies, and if you are spotted, run to the nearest locker and hide. Rinse and repeat until you finish a level. You don't have any items or weapons that you can use to either attack or distract the enemies, so your only approach is to avoid them completely. This is how most of Home Sweet Home will play out. The stealth is extremely basic. Bare bones is the best way I can describe it. The mechanics are never evolved or fleshed out, and it never really forces the player to do anything unique or interesting. The enemies may be different in their design or how they operate mechanically, but they always boil down to the player needing to avoid their line of sight. Occasionally, the game will throw in a puzzle that will need to be solved, while also including an enemy that will need to be avoided. But this is about as exciting as it gets. There are many other games out there that do stealth better, but Home Sweet Home does the basics well enough that it wasn't a major detriment to my overall experience. I just wish it did more instead of doing the bare minimum. Fucking story of my life right there, Jesus Christ. The second part of the gameplay is puzzles, and they are pretty basic as well. You will either need a key to unlock something, or to blow out a candle to unlock a door. Nothing that will require you to use much of your brain capacity. There is only one puzzle I can think of that truly stumped me, and that was his safe in the police station. Not because it's overly difficult, but because the hint it provides is extremely vague. I went back and forth looking at this hint and trying to unlock the safe for what felt like an eternity, but I could never figure it out. After I became frustrated, I decided to look up what I needed to do, and after going through many threads and comments, I realized I was not alone. To put it simply, the numbers on the safe and the little arrow on the bottom are trying to tell the player that what they need to do is find the opposite number on the dial to those shown in the hint. It may seem simple now that you know that, but judging by how many people needed help with this, I came to the conclusion that this puzzle didn't provide enough information to the player, which in contrast to how basic the other puzzles are, makes it stand out as something that is very frustrating. Much like the gameplay, the puzzles don't do anything exciting or truly unique. Unlocking a door isn't exciting. I do that every day when I sneak into an unsuspecting family's home. Home Sweet Home could have done more with its time mysticism to create interesting puzzles. It had that opportunity, but it was wasted away much like every other aspect of the gameplay. The environments themselves are extremely atmospheric and one of the best parts of Home Sweet Home. The first level does a great job of setting the mood and the tone for the rest of the game. The area is dimly lit, as most horror games are, but it is the way that it feels that really unsettles the player. It is cluttered and somewhat claustrophobic, even though there are large rooms the player has to explore. The same goes for the second area set in a police station. It just looks like a standard police office in Taiwan. Not that I would actually know what that would look like, they haven't caught me yet. But the creepiness can be found in its mundanity. It is an extremely still location. The best way I can describe it is as though everyone that used to work in the station just disappeared one night. It creates this intense feeling of dread, as though what caused these people to leave, or what took them, will get you next. It is pretty damn cool. Since it is set in Taiwan, it feels alien to a player like myself. I am not familiar with these places, so I never know what to expect. The problems with the environment is that they get repeated in the second half of the game. The developers don't try and spice things up with these places to make them interesting, or give a narrative reason why the players are exploring the same place, and it takes away from the atmosphere and uneasy feeling I felt when exploring these locations for the first time. Horror needs to keep people on their toes if it is to effectively be scary, and Home Sweet Home forgot this. I don't know whether this is done due to laziness or if the developer ran out of time and had to reuse locations. Either way, re-exploring these same locations sucked most of my enjoyment out of the game. Even though the core plot and repeating environments is a major letdown, the narrative within the environments is excellent. The environment is the narrator in Home Sweet Home. You'll get snippets from the player character on occasion, but you will only get the vaguest understanding of the plot if you are only exposed to what you are told. The main narrative thrust of the game is told through environmental storytelling, diary entries from your missing wife, and notes. In my opinion, the developer's ability to tell the story through these elements is something to praise. I will only cover a few examples in this video as there are too many to go through, but I will discuss parts that really worked for me. First, the apartment the player character and his girlfriend live in. On a few different occasions, the player will be allowed to explore the apartment. On each different occasion, the environment will slightly change and tell a different story. The first time, you will see the apartment is occupied by someone who's going through some shit. An answer machine will play a message from the character's friend, Ju. The message is one of concern. Tim has been acting differently since his girlfriend's disappearance, and understandably so, and the voicemail establishes this idea.
Hey Tim, it's Du. What's up with you, man? I haven't seen you in ages. Hope you're doing well. Call me back so I know you're not dead.
This is further explored when the player explores the apartment. They see it as messy. Beer bottles are strewn all over the place, food scraps and dirty dishes have been left in the sink, and the bedroom is dirty. The environmental storytelling further reinforces the player character's mental state. He is broken, depressed, and lonely. He wants his girlfriend back and doesn't know how to cope since she has disappeared. His life has deteriorated and he has become lazy and turned to alcohol. He is a man who was not coping. You don't know about Tim's mental health when you're playing the game because he never comments on it. It is up to the player to analyze the environment and see exactly what is going on in his head, and I honestly think that's fucking awesome. But the apartment also hints at the mental state of his girlfriend and the overarching paranormal themes of the game. The player will see red string running through the apartment and covering doors. This same string plays a major role in other segments of the game outside of the apartment. Now, we don't know whether the player character or the girlfriend put up this string, but its clear significance in some form of paranormal context connects the normality of the apartment with the abnormal world of the more horror-focused areas. Another thing the player will find while exploring the apartment is this picture of Tim and his girlfriend that is facing down. It is one of the only interactable objects in the environment, and for good reason. The player can pick up the picture and put it back in its place, but no matter what, the picture will always fall face down again. The way I interpreted this, and I'm probably wrong, but I saw this as some paranormal forces telling Tim to give up the search for his girlfriend. She is with them now, and he is best off letting her go. There are many more pieces of environmental storytelling such as those I have talked about, and they really add to the world of Home Sweet Home. So much time and effort was put into the smaller details in the environment, and you are doing yourself a disservice if you don't explore every nook and cranny while playing this game. It is one of the areas where Home Sweet Home truly excels. I also want to talk about the enemy design for a second. The enemy design of the monsters is either great or a mixed bag depending on your opinion on genre cliches. The first enemy you encounter is this woman who feels ripped straight out of The Grudge on the ring. The second is this gigantic guy with a red eye and tiny mouth that tracks your movement. The last are ghosts who are introduced in the later half of the game and generally act as a surveillance camera for the girl I mentioned before, which means you have to juggle avoiding her while navigating the environment to avoid them. What I really loved about this game isn't how these enemies functioned in terms of their mechanics. All of them boil down to avoid their line of sight if you don't want to die. But how the environmental storytelling and the use of Taiwanese mysticism provides 2 out of 3 of the enemies with interesting and sometimes tragic backstories. The Grudge girl you encounter is more than just a cliche of a box cutter. She has an extremely tragic backstory that provides the player with an interesting narrative while tying into the themes and narratives of the game. Before you encounter the girl for the first time, you stumble across a newspaper clipping that talks about a girl from a famous university disappearing after witnesses reported her heading home after suffering from a severe stomachache. When you look at the newspaper, you also see a picture of her. In a section where you must avoid the girl while trying to escape a school dormitory, you stumble across a note in one of the rooms that details something known as the nail jinx. The jinx can be inflicted on someone the caster extremely hates. It makes the person suffer from nails piercing through their stomach, but it can only be cast by experienced casters. When you explore the room you found the note in, you find blood and nails in the sink, and on some occasions the girl can be seen coughing up nails while looking for you. What this suggests is that the enemy you are facing is a girl who tried to jinx someone they hated, but it backfired and the jinx was inflicted on themselves. But why would she do this? A little bit later on, you see the girl crying over a desk. When you enter the same room, you find that she was crying over a hugging doll and a piece of paper describing another jinx known as the leechery jinx. I butchered that, but let's keep going. This jinx can make someone forcefully fall in love with you, and a doll that looks like 2 people hugging by forcefully being tied together must be used in the jinx, which is the doll you found in the desk. Similar to the first jinx, it cannot be cast by a novice, but seeing her cry over this suggests she was the one who tried to do it. What this suggests to the player is that the girl deeply loves someone, but since she tried to use the jinx, it suggests the person she loved didn't feel the same. This is reinforced by the girl whispering "I miss you" and "come back to me" when she gets close to the player. But her use of this jinx and the nail jinx tells an interesting story. She loves someone, but that guy was in love with someone else. So she tried to cast jinxes that would make that guy fall in love with her while also killing the girl he was in love with. Since she wasn't an expert caster, both of these backfired and she was forced to suffer while the person she loved wanted nothing to do with her. Side note about the girl, I just remembered that in a certain part of the game, you see a boy hang himself and she starts to cry. So, what that suggests is that the love jinx actually worked, but because she died because of the nail jinx, he couldn't live anymore and had to kill himself. So that, again, fucking awesome. You wouldn't have picked up on that if you didn't go through all the stuff and try and figure out what exactly was going on with her. So, kudos. This is absolutely fantastic. This is one of my favorite parts of the entire game. Sitting here, going through the environment, trying to piece together the story of the enemies I'm facing. Another enemy, this big old guy, receives the same narrative treatment, but I won't go into his backstory because, well, I'm fucking lazy. Needless to say, the same amount of effort went into his narrative as that found in the girl. In my opinion, this is exceptional. I love when enemies aren't simply enemies, but have their own personalities and backstories. It provides more weight to each encounter while humanizing them. They aren't just monsters, though their actions suggest otherwise, but they are people who have faults. They are suffering because of their actions, and as the player, we are entering their world of suffering. Where the enemies kind of become a big disappointment is in their numbers and how one is reused. After encountering the big guy, I was expecting each level set in this nightmare world to feature a new enemy with unique gameplay mechanics and an interesting backstory. Sometimes my expectations screw me over. I thought life was going to be awesome, but here we are. After encountering the big guy, you run into the girl again. At first, I was okay with this, but little did I know that she would be the main enemy for the rest of the game. There are these ghost guys who act as her eyes, but they don't receive the same love and care as her or the big guy. They are just there to provide the slightest bit of gameplay variation. But when you think about it, they are just an extension of the girl. They don't chase you or anything, they just scream and the girl comes running in. I was really hoping to run into something else, but nope, it's just her. At this point, I knew who and what she was. I knew the best ways to avoid her, so in the end, she wasn't scary anymore. She was no longer a girl who had fallen in love with someone and would do anything, even if that meant murder, to be with them. She was now an AI in a game that I knew how to get around. I honestly feel like the enemy variety dropped off in the second half because the developers ran out of time. I don't think it was because they are lazy, like I said before. I know the major efforts they went to throughout the rest of the game, but repeating things takes away from the horror. You can't fear what you understand, you fear the unknown, but by the time you get up to the second half of the game, you know everything Home Sweet Home has to offer. I have very mixed feelings about Home Sweet Home. It even made me do that whole YouTuber apology sigh. On the one hand, though the gameplay was simple and didn't do anything new, it was more than enough to keep me engaged. I absolutely love the environments and how they are used to tell an interesting story, most of the enemies and how they have a unique reason to be how they are, and the use of Taiwanese mysticism was refreshing and very interesting. On the other hand, the plot was underdeveloped, my enjoyment of the game dropped off significantly during the second half due to reused assets and enemies, and the abrupt ending left me feeling extremely empty. I can only recommend Home Sweet Home to hardcore horror fans who want to experience a different setting or want to experience Taiwanese mysticism used in horror and enjoy scouring the world to uncover an actual interesting story. Just remember, any questions you have about the main plot will not be answered. But for everyone else, I would say skip this one until the sequel is out and you can experience the complete package. Until the sequel is released, Home Sweet Home feels like half a game with a damn good first half. I will play Home Sweet Home 2 because I think there is enough promise to make me check the game out. I just hope the mistakes this game makes aren't repeated in the sequel, because nothing is more annoying than something abruptly ending